Hello friends and welcome to another History of Fingerboarding video. Today we're going to discuss the origins of one of the most important products on a fingerboard setup. It's the item that allows the board to roll. It is truly revolutionary. Yes, that's right, we are going to discuss the history of fingerboarding wheels. Additionally, I'll share the overall characteristics of wheels during different time periods using some of my own collection. The pre-Tech days were so much different from today. Old school fingerboarders discussed taking apart toy cars, such as the Hot Wheels brand, and using the axle from those, complete with the wheels, with their fingerboard setup. As Lance Mountain discusses, they would attach these Hot Wheel wheels to a popsicle stick and use those as fingerboards. Martin Winkler even mentions that he used this method back in the late 80s and early 90s as well. Other wheels were from whatever skateboard toy that the person had. In the early 90s, I myself had this Rufio toy who was a character from the movie Hook. The toy had a detachable skateboard. I would pretend to skateboard with that toy. You can see in this clip here, Dennis Steemack does a super steezy kickflip on a toy skateboard as well back in 1992. This was the reality in the early days. We also know that some fingerboarders were making their own wheels as well, out of beads or whatever they could get. When Tech launched in 1998, the game changed dramatically. Tech introduced plastic wheels. These wheels also had printed graphics on them as well, mimicking skateboard wheels in terms of appearance. This completely changed fingerboarding. You can now buy a fingerboard almost anywhere. While these wheels worked, they definitely had room for improvement. They did not roll smoothly, they screeched loudly, and wore down pretty quickly. Almost immediately, fingerboard DIYers began to explore modifying them to improve performance. Some fingerboarders attempted to use beads as wheels. One of the first companies to offer fingerboard wheels for purchase online was Sunnyside FB, which was founded by fingerboard legend Scott Hitkowski. The Avention wheels were actually beads. The main issue with beads were that you could not tighten the nut enough to prevent them from flying off. So to counter this, people would glue the nuts to the axle. Gary Moyer, aka Mr Scorpio, experimented in creating dual durometer wheels by adding an exterior material to the outside. Gary attributed this idea to old school fingerboard legend Danny Rodriguez, aka D-Rod Pod. Gary specifically added automotive vacuum line to a Tech wheel in order to improve the smoothness of the ride. Hydraulic Wheels, founded by Ed, was one of the earliest companies that I can remember that focused on actually selling wheels. Eventually, Ed shared with the community back in around 2001 the idea of incorporating bearings from toy cars into Tech wheels. This was integral in the future development of bearing wheels. Joe Leclerc utilized a dual durometer concept in developing oil-rolled wheels, becoming the first widely available professional wheel on an international scale. Oil-rolled wheels utilized a core, in this case a large metal core, with an outer material of plastic. Oil-rolled wheels were first made in 2003 with the assistance of Joe's father. Eventually, Joe was making two different sizes. The normal size, which were 4.5mm wide, which is roughly the size of a Tech wheel, and the vert style, which were about a millimeter wider at 5.5mm. Even though Joe was based out of Luxembourg, he did not limit the availability of the product to just Europe. He also sold worldwide, and many fingerboarders from all over the globe, including the United States as well as Australia, purchased those wheels. Epidemics were another wheel company founded back in the early 2000s. They were founded by Moses Sanchez. Moses had a popular truck company as well at the time, Public, and eventually even distributed some Black River products. The wheels were plastic with small metal cores. It had a run of a couple years or so before Moses completely disappeared from the scene, leaving a ton of orders unfulfilled. Fingerboard legend Martin Winkler had been making fingerboard wheels prior to Tech even existing. Winkler Wheels were available at a limited scale in the early 2000s. mainly at in-person fingerboard events. Winkler wheels were sold in tandem with X-pins or Wim pins, which modified the Tech Deck truck to be usable. For us in the United States, these were inaccessible to us in the early days of fingerboarding, but eventually the production increased to a point of it being widely available. Winkler Wheels introduced a special pro model shapes, including pro model shapes for Boris Dici, the late Matthias Juncker, Afrobi, Timo Lieben, as well as the Fat Man. And the most famous of all were the Big Daddies. They also incorporated graphics on the side of the wheels as well. Later on, Winkler Wheels became a part of Black River. Around 2004 and 2005, Mike Schneider developed a prototype that would eventually become flat-based wheels. Next came the G2s, which had both bearingless and bearing options. They were significantly smoother than the Tech Deck wheels before. Building upon this, Mike continuously improved the wheels with each generation, and that continues to this day, with the recent release of the G8 flat-face wheel shape. I'll be doing a much deeper dive into both Mike Schneider and Flatface in the future, as there's so much to share about the company and Mike's history. In 2006, Jerome Veroni founded Substance Wheels. These were lathe-bearing wheels of high quality as well. As you can see, they look beautiful. Initially, Jerome's wheels had a backing, which was common at the time, and eventually offered a backless option as well. Backless wheels fixed an issue where the back of the wheel would wear against the hanger over time, which would cause the wheel to perform poorly and sometimes get stuck. This was quickly adopted by all the other major wheel producers. In the mid to late 2000s, you would also get bearings as part of a tuning package. This would allow somebody to modify Tech Deck wheels to make them smoother. Companies such as Arctic Hardware, founded by Martin Isley, offer this. Alright guys, we are halfway through the video so far, and I figured it would be a good time to share some characteristics of those early wheels and provide some examples. I have some OG Tech Deck wheels, some Epidemics, some flat-face G2 bearing wheels, as well as some very old G4s. But first, I'm going to quickly ask you all to hit that like button and subscribe if you haven't already. Tech Deck wheels were the first wheel I, along with a lot of other fingerboarders, used when they first started fingerboarding. They were cheap, plastic, bearingless wheels, combined with the Tech Deck axles, which were at times, well, who am I kidding, almost always crooked, and led to a wobbly, screech-filled ride. I do have some nostalgia over the TIE Fighter sounding roll away after busting out a banger, but it definitely bothered those who were around, and it was a very clunky experience riding those wheels, and hard to use, to be honest. Next, I have a set of core wheels here, specifically the Epidemic wheels. They roll much smoother than the Tech Deck wheels, and were a very large upgrade at the time. Over here, I have some Flatface G2 bearing wheels. Flatface was one of the earliest adopters of bearings in their wheels. Bearings led to an even smoother ride over those cores that you saw before. One thing you'll notice is that the wheels do have a backing, which I discussed about the weaknesses earlier there. And lastly, I have a pair of very early Flatface G4 wheels. These have a more backless design that allows it not to wear away. Alright, so jumping back into the history of fingerboarding wheels. Close Up, founded by fingerboard legend Damien Bernardet, offered a variety of different options for fingerboard wheels over the existence of the company. Initially, their wheels were large and made of rubber. However, they eventually refined their shape and they began to offer metal core as well as bearing wheels. Nolly Wheels, which was a company that came out around 2008, 2007 or so, offered wheels completely made out of metal, specifically aluminum, which increased the heftiness of the deck and the setup. We saw Oak Wheels launch back in 2009. Oak Wheels, made by Ricardo, became the first widely available fingerboard wheel made from urethane. Oak Wheels and that mucho feeling were immensely influential in the popularization of urethane as a substance for creating wheels, inspiring companies such as Joy-Colt, Yellowwood, Lab, and more. It's quite possible that at this point, urethane wheels are more popular than plastic wheels in professional fingerboarding. Simon Cartledge, an OG fingerboarder out of the UK, founded Cartwheels back in 2011. Simon offered cord wheels, which were made of nylon, which is a material that is pretty unique to Cartwheels. They also incorporated a locking colored core design, which I think just looks spectacular. In 2015, we saw Joy-Colt further refine the urethane wheels market, making a wheel that took the market by storm due to its smoothness and appearance. Unfortunately, it seems that Joy-Colt was plagued with customer service issues, and it now appears that the owner closed up shop. As I mentioned before, urethane wheels seem to be the primary material used for most fingerboard companies when making their wheels at this time. We've seen some beautiful wheels released from companies such as Lab, Dynamic, Piro, Ilspils, Wysocki, Yellowwood. The list goes on. As mentioned before, Cartwheels are pumping out wheels with nylon cores. And of course, the big guns, the OGs such as Black River and Flatface, are still around making some amazing plastic wheels. What innovations will be next in the wheel game? Let me know in the comments below what you think. As always guys, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, then please do me a favor and share it around with your friends or share it on social media. It really helps big time. Tap that like button and subscribe if you haven't already if you really like fingerboard content. Until next time, peace.